In this video, we're going to talk about some deadlines that are coming up as it relates to the One Big Beautiful Bill, safe harboring your project, and avoiding the foreign entities of concern administrative bureaucracy that could be coming next year. First, walk us through what is safe harbor.
Safe harbor. So it's kind of an interesting choice of words, but it's been around for a long time, actually, in the ITC environment, investment tax credit. Safe harbor simply allows you to beat a deadline. And there's a couple different ones in play right now.
Right.
Safe harbor for FEOC, safe harbor for ITC. But the safe harbor then designates a period of time where if you make a decision by this date, you can do this for an extended period of time, which in these cases that we're talking about today is a 4-year window that it opens up.
So we have this deadline that we're talking about is the 30% federal tax credit going away for solar energy, for commercial solar energy. And this is the safe harbor period in order to lock in and keep that tax credit for the next 4 years.
Right. And it's actually 4 years, Warren, from when you safe harbor it.
Okay.
So if you safe harbor it in 2025, you have until the end of 2029. If you safe harbor it in 2026, you have until the end of 2030.
Correct. And now there's two mechanisms or ways in order to safe harbor. Talk about those.
Yeah, so the one is called the physical work test. And that test, you have to begin some type of custom work to that project. It can be on-site or off-site.
Yep.
You have to begin it, and you have to meet a continuous work requirement,
which
also has a safe harbor. So there's a number of different safe harbors, but that safe harbor is 4 years. So if you have a physical work test, if you can prove that you started physical work of some sort that's custom, I'm not talking about buying off-the-shelf hardware here.
Right.
If you can prove that, you then have 4 years to complete the project. The other one is the 5%.
Okay.
And the 5% test is simply, did you spend 5% of the cost of the project now ahead of the deadline?
Right.
Okay. That's the one we use the most.
Correct.
It's what we recommend people using because it's much easier to prove. You don't have to get into continuous work requirements as much. You spend the 5% and you have the safe harbor. Now, we recommend spending a little more than 5% because the final cost of the project is what matters.
Right.
And if that cost of that project goes up for any reason and you only go in at 5, you've lost your safe harbor potentially.
Right. So here at Paradise Energy Solutions, we're requesting that our customers put down 7%, 6 or 7% to give them that buffer if there are any cost overruns. So you have these two mechanisms in order to safe harbor the project to secure the tax credit, and the deadline to do that is when?
Depends which one you're safe harboring.
So the tax credit.
So we'll start with the tax credit.
Right.
The deadline for the tax credit is July 4th of 2026.
Correct.
So you would have that long. Now, keep in mind with any safe harbor, you don't wait till the last day.
Right.
Okay. So the FEOC requirement, on the other hand, is December 31 of 2025.
Okay. Let's just take a step back and talk
Sure.
about what is FEOC.
Okay. FEOC it's an acronym.
Yeah.
And it stands for Foreign Entity of Concern. And it's basically a requirement that was aimed at China, but it includes North Korea, Russia, and Iran.
Right.
So those 4 countries, if there's any connection of a manufacturer to those countries, they're not going to qualify. Okay. So, and here's the reality of it. Many solar hardware components or finished products are touched by those countries, especially China. So that's going to be potentially challenging because once the FEOC requirement goes into play, if you use hardware that's being touched by those countries, it's not going to qualify. And the severe part about the FEOC requirement is if you don't meet it, you lose the entire ITC.
Right.
Which is going to be somewhere between 30, 40, 50% of your project.
Correct. So in order to make sure that you're FEOC compliant, the ownership and control of that company cannot be any of these from these 4 countries.
Right.
And then a certain amount of the components in the product cannot come from those countries either.
Right. And that percentage is set.
Okay.
So for next year, it's 40%.
Correct.
And the year after that, it's 45. And the year after that, it's 50. It goes up to 60. So that's been set. The issue that remains, Warren, is that they have not designated where this applies. So what do I mean by that? What about a component or a subcomponent to a module? There's a lot of different parts to a module. What about the stuff that goes into those?
The raw materials.
Yeah. How far down in the supply chain are they going to enforce this requirement? Because the further you go down in the supply chain, the higher the odds are that you're going to hit China,
Right.
or one of these other countries, in supplying that component. And that's not known yet.
And we were supposed to know about that 45 days ago, or however, 45 days after the executive order came out.
Yes, and we still don't know. And now we have a government shutdown. Who knows where this is? But the general consensus is that we will hear something in a general way by the end of this year, 12/31/25. And then within the next year, we will get more finite details around that. But we don't know. And that's just a tremendous risk.
So if I'm on the fence, I'm thinking about buying solar right now, I'm not that concerned about the ITC. I think I can put down my money next year instead of this year.
Right.
What am I putting at risk?
You're putting at risk potentially the whole project.
Right.
Now you say, how can that be? Well, the reason that could be is the FEOC requirement will kick in on January 1.
Yeah.
And we don't know what that is, but we know this. It's going to restrict the supply of hardware. It's going to raise the demand for the qualifying hardware. And there's a requirement around the safe harbor where you have to take possession of the product within 105 days of when you make the safe harbor payment. If that doesn't happen, it doesn't qualify as a safe harbor.
Right.
So if we get a pinch on the supply side, which I fully expect, we're already seeing it.
Yeah.
And the vendor doesn't promise you 105-day delivery, that's not a safe harbor. And I see that as being a real difficult place to maneuver if this supply situation continues to deteriorate.
Yeah, so you really, if you've been considering solar, you really need to make the decision and move forward now to avoid FEOC and to safe harbor it.
Yes.
Let's talk about the process. They decide, okay, they're ready to do it. They've got their 5 to 7% down. Mm-hmm. They sign a contract. What happens then?
Yeah, so they make a payment to us.
Right.
We're the EPC. We then buy the hardware that qualifies. Now, as long as we're safe harboring ahead of it, we don't need to worry about it.
Right.
All we have to do is make sure we have hardware.
Right.
Okay. And if they are a domestic content project, which many of ours are, we have to make sure it's a domestic content product.
Right.
Domestic content and FEOC are different.
Yeah.
Very different. Domestic content goes by where the product is made. FEOC goes by who is involved in the ownership of who's making the product.
Right. It's actually both for FEOC. It's who owns it, who's got control and ownership, and where are the components made.
Yes. I mean, it also goes into who's claiming the tax credit.
Yeah.
That's another issue. But so different requirements. Safe harboring in advance, we can buy hardware that either meets the domestic content requirement if that's on the project or that doesn't. And we can safe harbor and build that project anytime over the next few years, and they don't have to meet that FEOC requirement. It's huge. It's actually very huge because the price, we're seeing this.
Yep.
The prices are moving up for all the hardware that appear to meet the requirement. And manufacturers have not yet certified their hardware.
And so if I decide now, I don't want to take this risk, let me go ahead, sign the contract, give you my 7%, you're going to order the parts and get the process started so I don't have to comply with FEOC, and I'm going to secure the tax credit, and I decide in February, you know what, this investment's not for me, can I get my money back?
Not from us.
Okay.
So that's a really good question. And I think the other piece here is they have to take possession of that hardware. So they're potentially it's on the job site. You know, you got hardware. But the hardware would certainly have value.
Right.
There's two things you can do with the ITC. The one is you can still transfer it.
Right.
So you could potentially sell that hardware to somebody else with a safe harbor attached to it.
Okay.
And the other is the hardware simply has value to somebody else. The risk is clearly that it's hard to project future markets for hardware. So I would say you want to be pretty sure you're going to do the project.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to do it, that's what I would recommend. We cannot legally refund the money.
Right.
That's
we spend the money.
That's correct.
We purchase the product. If a potential customer is thinking about this, the deadline really is December 31st, but internally we need to get that process. We've got to order these parts.
It was yesterday, Warren.
It was yesterday, yes. No, in reality, when is that?
Yeah, so, you know, we do have to have that time to turn the transactions, move the money, secure it from a vendor, make sure the supply is adequate for that project. It's what we want for that project. So that takes some time. And the reality is, the longer you wait, the more people who will be doing this at the same time.
Right.
So that's why I said yesterday. I mean, ideally, we've been encouraging safe harboring ever since the Treasury guidance came out back in August. And I mean, it's like as soon as possible. Right. In my mind, there's no doubt. The sooner the better. I think through the end of November, we're going to have capacity to be able to do that. But when you get beyond that, you're getting into holiday season and crunch time, more people pulling the trigger at the last minute, and it can get very challenging. So I would say if you're going this way, you're going to build a project. You're sure you're going to build a project. Don't wait.
Absolutely. Get the process started now. What happens now if somebody who doesn't heed these warnings and we go into next year and they even miss the July 3rd cutoff date and they decide July 5th of next year that they want to move solar? What do they have to abide by? What are their deadlines?
Well, let's be really clear. We're only talking about commercial. Residential is ending the end of this year. So,
correct.
But in the commercial market, they could decide to install a solar system up until 12/31 of 2027 if they could get installed the same day they decided. That's the deadline. Yep. 12/31/27 is the deadline.
Installed.
Yep. Ready to operate.
Yep.
Turn on. That's not realistic in the commercial world. And Warren, just as a note here, we are dealing with some ICAs, interconnection permits, with some utility companies right now that are hitting a year and a half.
Right.
So if you back up a year and a half from the end of 2027, we're almost too late.
Right.
That's just, I mean, it's going to get there quick. So middle of 26, I mean, you got a year. But if you don't safe harbor, your project is very much at risk to just trying to get it completed.
Right.
Because you got to go through the permitting process and the ICA process. Utility companies are not processing these faster. They're being inundated. And so it's slowing down. And they have no urgency. If they push it beyond the deadline, if you can prove that, you might still be able to build, but it gets messy.
And at the same time, our installation calendars are filling up as well.
Absolutely.
And our capacity to install it by the end of 2027 is shortening.
We have the largest backlog right now that we've ever had.
Right.
And it's over a year. So now we can work projects in, other projects push, permitting gets delayed. There's a lot of things that happen and our schedule is somewhat fluid. But there is no doubt that capacity is going to be an issue to get projects installed by the end of 2027.
So let's recap this, Dale, and maybe simplify it if we can, and interrupt me at any point. If you're on the fence or you're thinking about solar or relatively confident you want to move forward with solar, yesterday was the day to move forward. You really want to reach out to us as soon as possible to get the process started. And that process is safe harboring your project. You're going to put 5 to 7% down. You're going to enter into an agreement. And once we receive your payment and your signed contract, we're going to immediately or within a few days order the parts for your project that are going to be sent to you and you're going to store them.
Right.
And that's going to lock in your tax credit and give you 4 years from the next end of the calendar year to install that project. And it's also going to save you from the unknowns surrounding these foreign entities of concern and the paper trail that comes along with it, as well as the costs.
I can assure you, Warren, if you have a quote right now from Paradise or anybody else, and you don't safe harbor, you will be paying more.
Yes.
Yeah, the price of the hardware is going to go up for qualifying hardware. It's already going up. You've got to move. And this crazy thing, Warren, we don't like to force people to hurry.
Right.
Now, that's been our style. I mean, our average length of close is over a year,
right.
Probably. Give people time, let them think about it. We don't have to make great decisions. But this is an exception. It's time to hurry.
It is truly a sense of urgency. There is a sense of urgency now if you don't want to risk increased costs and your ability to install it and potentially losing the tax credit.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
All of that's at risk if you don't move forward now. So if you've already been working with Paradise Energy, reach out to your local solar consultant and they'll help you get the process started as soon as possible. If you haven't reached out to us yet, we'll link in the description below a link to our website at paradiseenergy.com where you can request a quote and our local solar consultant will reach out to you to get the process started immediately. Thanks for watching. We hope you found this valuable.